So, in previous episodes, we've talked about the need to ensure that your security tools are compatible with the Mac ecosystem and that your IT teams understand what they need to do in order to secure Apple devices in a mixed environment. So, today's episode, we're talking to our colleague, Brad Bowers, the Field CISO here at SHI, who works with Fortune 250 orgs on all things cybersecurity. Thanks for joining us, Brad. Welcome to We Got Your Mac.
Thanks for having me, guys. Looking forward to this.
So one of the reasons we've invited you, Brad, is because we really want to bust a few myths about Mac security and understand what's true and what's not true. Because we used to hear, oh, Macs don't need antivirus or other security because there aren't as many Mac viruses. But then the market penetration's lower than it is for Windows. So, maybe it wasn't worth the effort for the bad guys. But as the Apple market share starts to grow, is that going to make them more attractive as targets? And actually, was it true anyway?
This is a kind of a misconception that's been going on for a very, very long time. The idea was that Macs were more secure inherently, and that's really just not the case. It really comes down to what you had mentioned. The fact that bad guys tend to go where the money is, right? So they're looking to go after the systems where they have the largest chance of being able to gain a value or to be able to steal the things that they're after. Now, this doesn't mean that the Macs haven't had their share of vulnerabilities, malware, and viruses. In fact, just recently, there's been a number of kind of high-profile ones.
So you're saying it's the people then? And so you're saying that the Apple ecosystem, being a closed ecosystem, isn't more inherently secure?
Complex question there and a complex answer. So natively, they are no more secure than a normal PC. But with that being said, Apple has done some really impressive things. The thing that kind of equalizes out between Macs and PCs here is really how attacks are done. So for instance, a very common one or a new one that recently came out is called Atomic. Now, Atomic is a piece of malware that focuses on the Macs, but it's very analogous to the same things that we see on the PC side. It's going after the people aspect, as you're referring to. So these types of malware are looking to be able to collect data, steal passwords, try to get around other pieces. Now, while the Macs have controls that help mitigate some of those risks, the people aspect is still exactly the same, and the risk is still the same on the Macs as it would be on the PCs.
So effectively, just because you're using a Mac, it doesn't actually make you less vulnerable to social engineering because people are still people, whatever they're using. So your data loss prevention strategy still needs to be the same.
The closed ecosystem piece provides significant advantages or helps add a couple layers of protection on the Macs. And this is something that is likely to grow over time. And ultimately, we'll see how it plays out.
By the way, what do you mean by closed ecosystem? Is it the application stack?
So closed ecosystem in this case being how Apple actually allows applications to be used within their devices. So a big chunk of what makes the Macs very secure is the fact that they do a much better job than a lot of their competitors when it comes to monitoring, approving, and really analyzing the applications that are supported on the devices. This is something that had historically been a reason why iOS devices like the iPhone and the iPads were more inherently secure than some of the competitors because of that closed ecosystem. Since Apple requires that any application that is run on these devices be signed by a valid Apple certificate, come from a known good source. Now, there's ways around that, but the fact that that extra layer of control is being put in place, it means that it's that much harder for attackers to be able to be successful in running a malicious attack or doing their social engineering piece as it would be against maybe a PC.
We've talked in the past on previous episodes, Kevin, about, a lot of organizations in the past have chosen Macs for the C-suite or the creatives, or they've chosen them because they're a status symbol. But Brad, have you seen organizations actually select Mac for security reasons?
Yeah, and this is changing, I think, over time, but about 5 years ago, you would see a lot of security teams and a lot of pen testers within the security industry using Macs predominantly. Now, the reason for this is partially because, let's be honest, the Macs are built like tanks. They're very rugged. They sip power compared to many of the other systems that are out there. This made them more attractive for security folks, but also because of the native architecture that the Macs are built on. Linux is just simply, and the whole Unix operating system, it's just simply easier for the security tools. So security professionals would leverage that as their underlying baseline to use all their tools that they needed to do to be able to do their security testing. Plus, since the PCs were often the target for more of the malware, more of the ransomware type things that is out there, it meant that they were kind of out of band. So if something was to impact, let's say, the organization, the security team, if they were leveraging Macs, may not be impacted in the same way, giving them that advantage, giving them that confidence that their machines are in fact secure or haven't been impacted by a event, and allow them to really focus on cleaning things up or mitigating a security impact.
Sounds like you're proving our point, Brad. I think Macs are more secure. I just was at JNUC 2023 and heard Fletcher Previn, who's the CIO of Cisco, and he's just released a report that talks about how he's done some research, and it does look to be that it is more secure and cheaper. I think we'll have to all read that report and deduce whatever biases that exist there. But if the security professionals are using the Macs, I think we're onto something in terms of their security.
So Kevin, let's pull that thread a little bit. So you're right. There's definitely layers of the operating system that have been put in place. There's layers that have been put into the new silicon chipset that add a security value, but they're not impervious to some of those problems too. So for instance, something that's kind of making waves right now is one called Atomic. It's a piece of malware that came out for the Macs not that long ago, and something very new known as Pac-Man. And this is a vulnerability that's specifically going after the new silicon chips, and it goes after a security tool specifically, something known as that process pointer, if you will, process authentication pointer. And not to get too geeky with it, but ultimately what that does, it allows an attacker to be able to control where things are in memory. And this is a really core thing. Apple made it so it would be more complex or harder for an attacker to get around it, and they really have, but like anything over time, there's always a little bit of a flaw in there. I obviously think that we'll see Apple take care of these vulnerabilities, and they've made strides to make it better than it is in some of the other operating systems, but there's still risk there, and there always will be.
Do you have a point as to whether or not to use Windows Defender, like what's in the Microsoft stack, or to use like Carbon Black or Jamf Protect?
So as far as the add-on tools, there's really good ones on the Mac side. Interesting enough, the native ones that come with the operating system are actually pretty effective. And this kind of goes back to what we were talking about in the very beginning, that closed ecosystem. So when you look at the tools that have been put in place on the hardware side, things like the silicon chips, the T2 processor that helps with encrypting files, helps with the certificates, helps with key management. And then if you move down the stack to parts of the operating system like File Vault and what is it called, their native antivirus pieces, all of those elements, when layered on top of each other, do a pretty darn good job. Where we see those solutions like Jamf come into play, or other solutions that may help on wrapping applications, and we could talk a whole bunch about that piece. But when you see these other elements being added onto it, it just makes them a little bit richer and allows them to work cleaner in a larger enterprise environment. So as of like maybe 7 years ago, it was actually complicated for large organizations to leverage Macs with the same level of compliance controls, with the same level of being locked down or configured in the manner that the organization wanted. They could do it easier on the PCs because of just how PCs came into the organization. So Macs have really turned the corner on this. They've gotten much better of introducing those native control elements, as well as leveraging things like Jamf that can be put on top to help better integrate it to all the other solutions that may exist in an environment. So they play better with the PCs, they play better with cloud systems, and they play better with other third-party solutions.
So that to me sounds like a bit of an "it depends" answer.
Doesn't it always? That's the answer in all things security. Whenever there's a question around, hey, is this at risk? Well, it depends, right?
You mentioned the compliance piece there, and I know we've talked in the past about the fact that this is something that's sometimes overlooked when people put a new technology into their environment. And I think you have had some examples of where overlooking it has perhaps led to some problems.
Apple's done a really good job of moving things to the right. And when I say that, I'm referring to making it so it's more of a corporate, sustainable, easy to integrate into business processes and solutions, and really just making it so it has the same level of accoutrements and controls that can be applied to it. And this is why we're starting to see the Macs more and more leveraged in corporate environments. And this comes down to the tools that they've done natively, but also just how they're being used and what controls can be applied around them. The compliance piece is absolutely huge. So a stumbling block that the Macs have always had is I can't put the same level of monitoring, the same level of compliance pieces, the same level of checks and boundaries that I need in order to allow them to be widely used across the organization. That has really changed. With the adoption of just changes that Microsoft has made in their stack from an Active Directory perspective to really more of the things that Apple has brought into the mix, you now can have that same level of control. And the common ones that we see are, well, I have a requirement because I'm a publicly traded company that I have things like when I log into the machine, I'm presented with a banner that says, you're logging into a corporate asset, to enforcing password complexity, compliance and histories, things like that, to not being able to add applications. All of those are elements that historically had made it a little bit more difficult to bring the Macs into the corporate environment. Those are now native. They can be done now much easier.
Interesting. You use the word accoutrement. I've never heard that in relation to Mac policy, but what you're saying is every organization is different. It's a snowflake. It depends on what you need to solve for as to which tool and which policy set you'll use.
Yeah. And, the PCs have the scars on their back from decades of having both nation-state actors, malicious users, malware viruses coming after those targets for a very, very long time. And as the Macs have gotten more popular, they're starting to see some of that and they're starting to weather through it. And they're doing a pretty good job. I mean, we're seeing them be able to deal with the same level and complexities of attacks that we've seen on even the most hardened PCs.
When we get into the "it depends" piece, so what kind of organisations are you seeing that are actually starting to deploy or are deploying Mac at scale? Is there a particular type of organisation that is going down this route from your perspective?
Yeah. So historically, it had been more types of organizations or even departments within organizations that were focused on maybe the creativity side, because the notion was that, well, the Macs are really good for the creative folks or maybe for executives. Not really the case anymore because they can be widely used. We see financial institutions, large financials, large pharma, high-tech manufacturing companies. Pretty much across the board, you'll see the Macs being leveraged in all areas of the business. So the security teams are being able to leverage them, the business teams are being able to leverage them, And since we have that large adoption of cloud technologies, solutions, and more SASE type products, the Macs play absolutely seamlessly with those. So it's easier for them to be used in the broadest types of orgs.
Do you use a Mac, Brad?
Can't see it, but I have two over my shoulder. So I use the Mac for a couple different reasons. For me, it's not because of the native security elements. It's more of just the form factor, the fact that they're built like tanks. They're really good on battery and the utilization piece. But there's something to be said about that. Many security teams that used to leverage the Macs for pen testing, things like that, they've kind of shifted away a little bit. And I think it will come back over time, but they've shifted away because the new ARM architecture makes it a little bit more complex for security professionals like myself to leverage them on the broad sense of tools that we typically need to use or want to use. That has made it more complicated to run unsigned applications. So on the security side, it's fantastic for the average business user because it means there's less risk of them getting compromised, them being susceptible to phishing or social engineering. But on the security side, when you need to run certain tools in a particular way, or you need to be able to run those unsigned applications, it's actually a stumbling block for us.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your time today, Brad. It sounds like we're going to have to get you back for several different conversations because there's a lot more to dig into. Thank you to everybody for listening today, and for more information and to find out about the next episode, visit wegotyourmac.com.